You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Flip through the galaxy of literature. Welcome to Canon Fodder. Here is your host, Mark Newbold.
You're listening to Canon Fodder in a very special episode as we're joined by author Michael Kogge. Star Wars fans will know Michael from his work on Star Wars Insider, Star Wars Gamer, the West End Games role-play series from back in the 90s, and many more Star Wars endeavours, including the junior novelisations of the sequel trilogy. Michael joined us to chat on Canon Fodder about John Carter, the audio drama, a new endeavour that has just reached its Kickstarter target to bring Edgar Rice Burroughs' classic sci-fi adventure to life with an all-star cast. Myself and Michael sat down to talk about John Carter, Star Wars and more besides on this very special episode of Canon Fodder. So, Michael, welcome to Canon Fodder. We're here to talk all about John Carter of Mars. I'm very, very interested in this project. I hadn't heard about it until a few weeks ago, and then all of a sudden, it seems to be everywhere. Give us a bit of detail about this amazing project.
Well, Mark, thanks for having me on Fantha Tracks here. So John Carter of Mars, the audio series, it's an audio drama, kind of like the Star Wars radio dramas, the National Public Radio dramas of the 80s and 90s. And it's going to be a full cast audio drama starring Sean Patrick Flanery. For Lucasfilm fans, they will know him as young Indiana Jones. Then we have also Tim Russ is playing Tars Tarkas. Tim Russ was Tuvok in Star Trek Voyager. Bruce Boxleitner plays Kantos Khan, who is John Carter's loyal human friend, while Tars Tarkas is, again, the green Martian friend of John Carter when he gets to Mars. And then we have Waze Chief. She was recently in Kevin Costner's Horizon. She's fantastic. She's playing the Princess of Mars herself, Deja Thoris. And then we also have the great legendary Tom Baker. In America, he is the Doctor Who for a lot of people. He's the one that people grew up watching on PBS here. And he will be playing the wise old man in the atmospheric tower, which is when John Carter is trying to save Mars. There's this one tower that's pumping up all this atmosphere. And just like the Wizard of Oz, there's an old man inside this tower who's keeping the planet alive. So it'll be a really great scene to both write and produce and hear, I think. Yeah, John Carter of Mars, it's based on a series of books starting with the Princess of Mars novels written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's about a Arizona gold prospector who basically gets astrally teleported to Mars. You know, he goes into a cave, and it's also set in like 1874. The original book was written in 1912. And it's this fantasy saga on Mars. I read it maybe about 12, 14 years ago, and I was like, I don't know why I hadn't read this before. It's so wonderful. There's so much wonder and imagination. You can see the roots of American science fiction and fantasy in John Carter of Mars, maybe even Tolkien too. This is the original. And Star Wars, having written a lot of Star Wars books, novels, stories, Star Wars also has a lot of roots in John Carter. John Carter, in many ways, is the grandfather of Star Wars.
That's a great way to put it. I've never thought of it in quite those terms. Are you keeping it in that original time setting? It's still going to be set in 1874. Is that the era you're sticking with, or is it more contemporary? How are you playing it?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions about, do we do contemporary? Do we do traditional? And traditional won out, and it because after I broke down many different kind of takes on, in terms of approaching the estate, and they wanted to know what kind of story you're going to tell. And we discussed a number of them, and I kind of beat them out story-wise. It came back to, like, what was my first love of this? And it's the original, right? It's the traditional. It's him being the Arizona mine prospector in the 1870s, right after the Civil War. Because in many ways, John Carter of Mars it's one of the first space operas, but it's also a Western. It's really a Western, I think. And it's a Western on Mars. So I think it's important to stick to that, that foundation, because it also hasn't been done before. John Carter of Mars, for as long as it's been around, there has not been an audio series like this. There was the famous Disney film in 2012, which kind of reintroduced everybody to the stories of John Carter, but it didn't generate enough enthusiasm to make a sequel or kind of continue the story. So we're kind of going back to the roots and doing it as Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote, which is pretty cool.
And you mentioned the film, which was, I think it's looks back now retroactively far more fondly than it was on arrival, and that would have certainly put the project, the property, on people's radars. But what is it about John Carter that you think lends itself, let's say, to doing a sort of serialized radio drama in the way that you mentioned, obviously Star Wars did all those years ago? What is it about John Carter that will work so well in that format?
Because John Carter is pretty episodic. You can feel the pace of the episodes or the chapters as you're reading the series. So there's that ebb and flow of an episodic drama, which works really well in radio. I think also the whole scope of it, you can do it on the screen like Disney did it quite brilliantly, actually, in points of the film. But with audio, you have the added benefit of your whole imagination to imagine everything, just like you do when you read a book, which is supplemented by sound, of course, sound effects and music and acting talent. So it's a really fantastic way of engaging with the story, bringing it back to life, kind of resurrecting it out of the text of 1912, making it something contemporary. Imagine if John Carter was a movie back in 1982, you know what I mean? That's what we're trying to capture, that kind of fun aspect of it. And, all those great fantasy and science fiction films of the early 80s and late 70s. That's where I think this sits. So it's kind of a really neat way to approach John Carter.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
It's interesting you mentioned that there's a sort of a lineage between Star Wars, let's say, and John Carter. Where was the crux of making this style what it became in that radio drama?
Yeah, so I grew up listening to the Star Wars radio plays, and I love them dearly. I think they're absolutely incredible. They stick with me today. My favorite retellings of the saga, especially Empire Strikes Back. A New Hope is like 6.5 hours long, and Brian Daley did a wonderful job kind of expanding everything. Empire Strikes Back, he expands it, but it's also like clean and packaged well. And if you're on a long drive and it's late at night and you can listen to Star Wars, a radio drama playing in your car, there's nothing like it. Luke talking to a Yoda, Mark Hamill talking to John Lithgow, who plays Yoda in the radio plays, a Brock Peters, who plays Darth Vader. He's a different Darth Vader than the Darth Vader you see on the screen. He has a slightly different intonation to his voice. He's I would say, slightly more emotional, slightly more angry, maybe more human Darth Vader than James Earl Jones' neutral kind of tone. I love that they have actors who sound like everyone, but sometimes they don't. That's cool with me. It really showed me when I was younger that you can do something new with something that's already been done before. Brian Daley and Tom Vagley and John Madden, the director, they all did that with those radio plays. So they're wonderful. And with John Carter, I want to kind of capture that same kind of energy and sense of fun, as I said. I've had a long experience in, script writing and screenwriting and playwriting and radio writing. Actually, I was at the BBC radio drama department working there for a little bit in England. This is kind of a natural extension of my career. And so it's fun to have a property like this and get to kind of dig in and do the epic treatment of John Carter.
You mentioned the incredible cast that you've compiled for this adaptation. How did you approach these big names? How did you get them on board? Yeah,
well, you just do it the old-fashioned way, is you go out and ask. I work in the film industry, so you put together a presentation, you go to their agents, you get you interested, this is the deal, this is what we're trying to do. And a lot of the times, because it's a really cool gig, especially if you get the actors, if you can. A lot of radio drama today is recorded in isolation, but in the past, if you can get them in studio, people are acting against each other. It's a couple of days in studio. It's a lot of fun too. You're putting together something really cool. Yeah, I think all the actors kind of responded to that. Of course, it helps that I've written properties for Star Wars, for HBO, for Warner Brothers, all those kind of things. They really do help, sell the project to the actor too.
Dealing with the Burroughs estate, how was that? Was it a tricky thing to deal with? Were they very open to a new adaptation? How did that go?
They've been wonderful partners. They are very supportive of this. There have been many Tarzan radio plays, but there's never been a John Carter. So they are all in, and they like the cast that we've gotten. They like our approach. We ran a Kickstarter. The Kickstarter is still taking like late pledges as a form of pre-sales for the production. When you're hiring actors of this caliber, they're expensive. You need to pay them what they're due. And then all the sound design is expensive, all those things, the licensing fees. But ERB has been just a great partner in terms of sharing their knowledge and giving us insight into how ERB kind of developed his stories, where to look for certain things, how to have callbacks with maybe some of the other books. It's like working with a smaller Lucasfilm, I would think. I would say that, and they're very dedicated and it's very family oriented. So they're very pleasant to work with, just like Lucasfilm.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
It strikes me, as you discuss that and the fact that there's never been a John Carter radio adaptation, it kind of feels now you look back at it like he should be in that sort of conversation with Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, and it never quite happened. Do you know why there was never an adaptation back in the day? Was there any resistance from the Burroughs people, or was it just something that never happened?
I think they tried for a long time to get a movie made. I'm not sure why an audio drama wasn't made. I was surprised to learn that they didn't do it on CBS Radio Theater or back in the day of Orson Welles when they were adapting every book under the planet. They didn't do John Carter of Mars. There was a film that was almost made, an animated film in the 30s that they actually did some test footage for. You can find it online. It's pretty cool. It is hard to get a movie or television show made in general for anything. And this is a property that had a hard time getting there, but it eventually did with Disney. It had a champion in the director, Andrew Stanton. He wanted to make it, and that's the thing. And he was off the success of Finding Nemo, so they gave him the shot. I think a lot of it comes down to you need to get a director or a writer or a producer who's super passionate about the project, can assemble the elements together, can get the right actors. And for film and video, or for film and TV, you need an enormous budget. For audio, the Kickstarter raised at the moment $80,000, which seems like a lot of money, but it's tight. So yeah, and it's funny, the Star Wars radio plays back in the 80s. I think the original one cost about $300,000. Yeah, so that gives you a good kind of comparison of what it takes.
You mentioned the Kickstarter, which has managed to hit all its targets. I think you're hitting stretch goals and such now. Tell us a little bit about that, because I was fascinated to see that there's an RPG element to it. There's even a plush toy. It sounds like a fantastic Kickstarter.
I'm the showrunner, series creator for this. I kind of came up with the idea for it, and then I pitched it to a couple of production companies, and Pocket Universe Productions is the production company that took this out, and they basically we all came together and put together a Kickstarter. So we had to have merchandise, right? And on this Kickstarter, you can get a role-playing game supplement based on the John Carter of Mars series and also the audio series with art from, a fantastic run of comics in the 70s, exclusive to the Kickstarter. Yeah. You'll never see it again. Part of the audience for John Carter of Mars is the game group, right? People who play role-playing games, especially. Role-playing games are huge on Kickstarter right now. And that whole industry since Stranger Things has kind of exploded. And a lot of people love, the sword and sorcery genre, which is kind of what this is. You call it Sword and Planet. But we thought it would be a lot of fun to do a role-playing game supplement. And so in order to both target that audience and because we kind of like it, we picked all the things we were selling as merchandise are things that we would want to as fans. Then we're doing a CD set. Frank Frazetta's estate allowed us to use his painting of John Carter. It's a very famous painting. John Carter Against the Moons with Deja Thoris. Then the CD will have, the whole thing in high resolution sound. Then we are also doing a series of books, 2 books. One is going to be a reprinting of A Princess of Mars in English, its companion book is going to be a printing of A Princess of Mars in the original Martian,
Wow.
Varsuvia. So,
Wow.
wow, yeah, it's pretty neat. So we developed a written language for Martian, and that's been a lot of fun to talking about how Martians would write, what species of Martians would write which way, how they would do they do it in rock or mud, how many fingers do they have? All that stuff we've
Yeah.
talked about in order to generate a written language. It's a souvenir book. I mean, you could translate it and read it, absolutely, but it's really cool. You're not gonna see this again. You can get a map that we're reprinting, or maybe even doing a new map. I'm not sure on based on we got to look at the final budget. And then we had this incredible artist. He's the art director for Red Dead Redemption. He did these character portraits of Dejah Thoris and Tars Tarkas and John Carter, oil paintings of them. And he just turned in the Tars Tarkas painting, and it's stunning. We're going to print them out, and they're going to be character portraits. If you give a certain enough money, your pledge is big enough on the Kickstarter, you get one of these signed character portraits by the actor.
Wow.
And last but not least is a Woola plush. I don't know if you remember Woola from the
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, Woola is John Carter's loyal frog dog companion. I have been working with a plush company to design a plush. So I feel in some ways like George Lucas was having to design Chewbacca when he was directing Star Wars, and here I am
Yeah.
trying to design Woola when working on John Carter. It's pretty funny.
And is this project one and done, or is there potential for more?
There's potential for more. Yeah, definitely. That's what we'd like. We'd like to start out a franchise that we could continue with. So at the moment, we're aiming at A Princess of Mars, the first book in the series. We would like to get to The Gods of Mars and The Warlord of Mars, which are books 2 and 3. That all depends on actors, money, success of the project. We hope to franchise it out if we can.
It is pretty amazing, and all the very best to you for it. I think it's a fantastic endeavor. I couldn't have you on the show because we have spoken before, as you mentioned earlier, and when I was with the previous website. It's been a long time since we spoke. Fellow Star Wars Insider writer as well, so you've got an illustrious history with Insider. But when I went through your list of Star Wars works, I didn't realize quite how much you'd done and how far back it went. Just looking and working on some of the West End game stuff, getting involved in that back in the day must have been an absolute joy as a younger writer.
It was my first publication. Mark, I was 17 when I got published. I wrote this article when I was a senior in high school in the Adventure Journal. I was at a convention last year, and there was a kid. He had driven across America to come to this convention, and he had the West End Games, my original article. And he said, "This is amazing. It's an inspiration." And I was really moved by that because I've had a long history with Star Wars. It's just an amazing universe. So yeah, it goes back a long time with West End Games, and even a little bit before that. The article was called "The Business of Bacta," but I actually have some other credits beforehand in the early '90s that were really special. I grew up loving Star Wars. Even when it was dead, I was still involved, and
Yeah.
after Return of the Jedi and the Ewok movies, my mind was still making up Star Wars stories.
Yeah, very similar. I struggle when people say about Star Wars being completely dead in the dark times. And I think, well, when the dark times was happening, we were making audio dramas and writing short stories, and West End were doing their stuff. So we were gaming 3 nights a week. So weirdly, in what people refer to as the dark times, me and my little crowd of Star Wars nutters were busier than ever. So I totally get that.
They weren't as dark as people say because there were still products being released over time, like the Blackstone 3D comics. There were You could go back and get the Marvel comics. There weren't any novels being produced, but there were some Ewok children's books being made.
Yeah.
The West End Games stuff was so rich. I remember reading the Imperial source book.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, somebody put a lot of effort into this, in terms of breaking down the bureaucracy of the Empire, and all those flow charts. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Yeah, so those were not dark times. Those were actually special times. I really like those times. And sometimes I miss them because there's such I don't want to say a glut, but there is so much content out here now. You have to pick and choose. You can't absorb it all.
That's very true. And like you say, and I kind of get what you're alluding to. I miss the days of sitting down with one of the source books or going through the corporate sector source book and pencils, rubber, notepads, making notes, getting stuck into a game. It was much more hands-on and tactile than maybe it is now when you're hitting a keypad to make something fire, then you were rolling dice and making it happen. So it felt more involved. And the thought that when Timothy Zahn was sitting down to do Heir to the Empire, and the legendary story is that they just stuck a pile of West End source books and stuff on his desk, and I think it was Slavicsek's Guide to the Star Wars Universe, and said, work off that.
Tom Veitch, too, doing Dark Empire. It led to a very special time, I think, with Star Wars. The books were running the show. For many years, they were the essential items of Star Wars. I love Star Wars storytelling in novels. It works so well. And I know we have movies, new movies now, and new television shows, but Star Wars books are still very special too. And it's an area that I hope people keep reading and keep supporting that, because it's a wonderful arena for Star Wars.
Hi, this is Kyle Newman, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
As a younger fan, a Star Wars fan, and getting into the West End stuff and getting your writing credits and moving forward through Star Wars and now onto everything else we've done, including, of course, John Carter, that you got to write the junior adaptations of the sequel trilogy, which a lot of us back in the day would read the junior adaptations of Star Wars Empire and Jedi, for example. That must have been such a treat for you to be able to do that.
If you told my 8-year-old self, who was playing with the Star Wars action figures, hey, you're going to write the sequels to your favorite characters, he was so in love with this that he would just nod his head and understand, and there wouldn't be another question about it, because that's how much it meant to me. It was a real treat. They were, challenging in their own way because of the way it is to write an adaptation for a movie that is being filmed and rewritten and kind of re-edited all at once. I put a lot of effort into making those the best they could be. I always do like to say, though, I'm the only writer, I'm probably the only person here who I had to kill off all 3 of the main characters. Sorry to spoil the movies for you if you haven't seen them, but I don't think anybody else has done that. I had to kill them all, one by one, kill the heroes of my youth. And I say that, just to kind of laughing, but it does mean something. C-3PO too, he almost dies.
Well, an interesting observation. I'd never thought of that yes, you did. You wrote all 3.
Yeah, coming up with a death scene for each one of those characters and making it special and in doing it in prose. Also thinking about my audience too. But a real treat. And I've been able to do a couple other Star Wars. I wrote a Bosk story for the Empire Strikes Back anthology and for the Jedi and Sith stories, which was a lot of fun. I wrote a story about a kid who doesn't have the Force, but he wants to become a Jedi. How does he get into the Jedi Order? That was a fun story to write.
Sounds like us when we were 8.
Yeah, totally.
Well, this has been an absolute treat. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating. Very best of luck with John Carter. It sounds absolutely incredible. Hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, and everybody can find the John Carter if you type in on Kickstarter, type in John Carter of Mars audio, or just even John Carter of Mars. You will see the audio series up there. We are still taking late pledges for pre-sales. Check it out. It's a product and, kind of a series that I think Star Wars fans will love. Words like Sith and Jedi and Bantha, they all come from John Carter of Mars. You will hear a lot of things that you didn't know, George Lucas absorbed when he was writing the original scripts. He definitely absorbed all of this classic science fiction, and it's all in there.
Fascinating. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Canon Fodder. For more Star Wars podcast content, be sure to subscribe to Fantha Tracks Radio on your podcatcher of choice. Subscribe to all our social media at links.fanthatracks.com. Be sure to be checking out fanthatracks.com daily for all your latest Star Wars news. And you can also join us live on YouTube for Good Morning Tatooine every Sunday evening at youtube.com/Fantha TV.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Desert Planet Discs.